Today we begin Mark chapter 13 with a story that follows immediately after last week's story about the widow's 2 coins. Today's reading is the beginning of what is known as the Little Apocalypse, a teaching in Mark, Matthew, and Luke that echoes much of the apocalyptic writings of the book of Daniel and is expanded in the book of Revelation. The word apocalypse simply means revelation, or the time when things are made clear. Jesus and his disciples are still gathered in the temple courtyard. After witnessing the widow's giving of her 2 copper coins. As Jesus left the temple and his disciples were following him, one of the disciples said to him, "Teacher, look, what awesome stones and buildings." And Jesus responded, "Do you see these enormous buildings? Not even one stone will be left upon another. All will be demolished." And Jesus and his disciples arrived at the Mount of Olives, outside the city of Jerusalem. And there Jesus sat. And began teaching privately with Peter, James, John, and Andrew. And they came and asked him, "Tell us, teacher, when will these things happen? What sign will show that all these things that are about to come to pass have reached their end?" And Jesus said, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many people will come in my name, saying, 'I am the one.' They will deceive many people. When you hear of wars and reports of wars, do not be alarmed. These things must happen, but this isn't the end yet. Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other, and there will be earthquakes and famines in all sorts of places. These things are just the beginning of the sufferings associated with the end." So as always, I invite you to wander along with me about today's story. Jesus and his disciples came from rural Galilee. And so I wonder what the temple and Jerusalem must have looked like to them.
A big and beautiful and magnificent city.
A big, beautiful, magnificent city.
Yes.
Being in a large population center after coming from small villages must have been shocking to their senses.
Sure. The congestion of so many people
Right.
can be shocking.
Is this the first time that Jesus has been to the big city?
And we don't know of any other time in the story of Mark.
Yeah, okay. So that in itself,
Mm-hmm.
as a teacher, he would certainly know of it as being the seat of power and the seat of religious activity. And so to be there for the first time for him must have been especially moving.
Sure. Yeah, so first time in the big city. I mean, moving, can be shocking. You mentioned the senses. I imagine those
Mm-hmm.
sights and sounds and smells,
And smells
as well.
but yes.
Yeah. I wonder why Jesus chose this moment as they were leaving the city and going to the mountain to teach his disciples about the coming destruction of Jerusalem.
Do you feel that, in case they didn't like, in case they revered it too much, like it's this shiny, amazing city? It's just a place.
Sure, don't become attached to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perhaps a beautiful, amazing city, but don't put too much of your, attachment of your, what is a noun for revering?
Reverie?
Reverie? Yes, I think that's what I was trying to go for. Your reverie in this object, this city. Yeah.
And especially since he just mentioned the whole thing's gonna come crashing down. And if he stayed there and continued on that theme, maybe people would attack him. It's very upsetting.
Sure. So if you're saying that if he were still around when the destruction happened, then maybe he would be blamed for it.
No,
No. Okay.
I was meaning if he kept talking about it, these disasters,
Yeah.
people might attack him because they don't want to hear that. So then he went over to Mount of Olives.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's a bit of a, he knows the danger that is associated with his teaching. That some people would not be happy about it and might resort to violence. Perhaps in a similar vein, I wonder why it tells us that Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately about this teaching. They didn't respond in the moment. They waited until they had a private moment with him.
Perhaps that relates to what Catherine was just saying, is that it's a scary thing to talk about the whole city's going to come tumbling down, and they didn't want to cause it or cause reactions by other people hearing this revelation, which might have been so shocking that other people would rebel towards Jesus. They needed to get away where they could ask him privately.
And it's bad manners to gossip about someone right in front of them.
Sure. Yeah, so that sense of safety and privacy.
Safety and privacy.
And yes, perhaps manners. Even in privacy from the other disciples, though. Interesting. So the Roman Empire besieged Jerusalem and burned down the second Jewish temple in 70 AD, less than 40 years after Jesus' own death and resurrection. And it was around this time that Mark, the first gospel to be written, was put down on paper. I wonder whether there's a connection between the destruction of the temple and the choice to write the gospel down.
Yeah, that's why I think there's a choice.
Yeah, I wonder whether there is a connection between the destruction of the temple and the choice to write the gospel down. In a culture where oral stories were as common as written ones, sort of a transition period.
Well, somebody has to make a historical record of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, since no stone will be left, people won't know what was there.
Sure. So somebody has to make a historical record.
Yeah, it's interesting too. It's like, I mean, seeing the temple or town get destroyed, you know, immediately realize the impermanence of things. Especially if you're, you know, one of his disciples, you want to make sure that those lessons that he taught don't get lost. You want to record those. And then at the end, he also says something about how, like, this is just the beginning of the pain and the suffering. Which, when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's pretty bleak. I mean, like, this temple's going to get destroyed, and that's just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
But that's true in real life. Like, wars, they go for generations. The devastation that's caused by them, and so knowing that as well, it'd be even more like important to share these teachings because it's not over. It's gonna, you know, the ramifications of that are gonna keep going. So.
Sure. Yeah. Perhaps a sense that these can provide hope as the sufferings continue, but also, as you were saying, seeing one thing that you thought was permanent be destroyed is a shocking lesson in impermanence, and so perhaps their response is to like, okay, let's try to preserve this thing that we have.
Maybe also as Mark was someone who feared Jesus or followed Jesus, he was validating, like, that Jesus predicted this, you know, like, below. Maybe the story would go to more places if it's written down.
Sure. So there's that sense of like, this is a prophecy that helps us understand the time we're in and this, these events that are happening, and perhaps we'll, if we spread this word, more people will understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Kate, where are you going?
I was thinking maybe more mystically, like the temple is a house for God, and it gets destroyed, and God needs a new house, and if the word is God, and writing down the gospel is the act of creating a new house.
Sure. So yeah, so the physical location, the house of God, is destroyed, and so the collective understanding of God's physical location needs a new focal point. Even as God is everywhere, there are still focal points, and we can see that in this desire to have a new focal point, perhaps. Yeah.
Maybe they just saw it as a video. Everything else is destroyed. Oh, here's some new good news that you can follow.
Sure. So it was capitalizing on the opportunity to share some good news. I wonder what this can tell us about the message of Mark's gospel?
I hope it means don't despair. You know, these kind of things are gonna go on, but don't lose hope. It's just what happens.
Sure. So don't despair, don't lose hope.
Determination that the story needs to be told. So we're going to write it down, put it out there, so that this is an important story. It needs to have a life beyond. And here we are, 2,000 years later, and in fact,
Yeah, so there's that determination to share the story, even as the present community might be shattered.
Right.
The story needs to be sent out.
correct.
And he said this needs to happen, this has to happen, it's supposed to happen, why? I don't know if we ever get, why does this have to happen,
Why the destruction has
yeah,
to
why
happen?
the destruction, that's what I'm curious about, and why does that need to happen? And then, I'm curious, how did the temple get destroyed? Was there an earthquake, was there enemies?
The Romans besieged
Romans,
and
okay.
destroyed and burned the temple.
Okay. Huh,
Yeah, it was in response to a Jewish revolt.
okay.
I think Mark really feels like Jesus' teachings connect to the political situations.
Mhm.
Everything he wants to connect to.
Yeah, so there's a political message here. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were to try to put that into words, what would you say?
In this particular story.
Or I was asking about, what this reflection on the destruction of the temple, which happened around the time that Mark was written down, what that can tell us about Mark's message. So if there's a political message, I'm curious how you would put that.
That our spirits are since they work and purpose aren't destroyed and the powers that be try to or destroy our buildings.
Sure, yeah. So our spirit, our sense of worth and purpose, as you said,
Yeah.
they persist and remain regardless of whether our temple, our city, etc., may be destroyed.
Yeah, or we together can create a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
This community that we want to see, trying.
the power of spirit, of intention, of choice to create new community in the aftermath of destruction. Yeah.
Suffering will always happen, it's gonna keep happening. But, keep going.
Thank you. I know I was drawing you out there, but that was really good.
I think also saying that it's kind of predicting this has to happen, this is gonna happen is kindness. Just like when, if you're sick and the doctor says, okay, this is normal, you're gonna feel worse before you get better, it's like, okay, this is normal, so it's like, okay, I think it's kind of a calming, to kind of like, this is what has to happen. It feels calming and like a kindness, even though it's gonna really not be great, but it's like, okay, this has to happen, this is what is gonna happen, it's normal,
So you're saying nobody wants to be sick, but if you are sick, it's helpful to have a diagnosis.
it's, yeah, to know, like, this is normal, you're gonna, this fever will pass in 20, whatever.
Mhm.
But it's nice to know, like, what's gonna happen, and the symptoms are normal, and then you'll
Yeah.
start feeling better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Knowledge,
Yeah,
understanding
the
allows us
knowledge.
to interpret the situation and act accordingly,
yeah,
and gives us
Yeah.
hope. Yeah.
yeah.
I wonder where the good news is for you in today's story.
God persists.
God persists.
Yeah, the destruction of the temple was not the end.
The destruction of perhaps the most important thing in the world was not the end.
I thought the Grinch before Christmas, right? It takes everything away, but Christmas persists.
Okay, so
Anyhow.
Romans as Grinch, I've not interpreted it that way before, but yes. Yeah.
I think the pursuit of love and goodness is, it could be so easily knocked down to human beings, because humans sometimes get weighed down by that, but it shows that the pursuit of goodness and love is just keeps going. I mean, you said what is the good,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, the goodness and love and the pursuit of these things keep on going.
Is this the first destruction of the temple or the second?
It's, the destruction of the second temple. The first time was when the Babylonians occupied.
So this one was not resumed.
Correct, yes. This is when, if you were to go to Jerusalem today and see the last remaining wall of the temple, that is from this destruction.
I'd like to add that the pursuit of love and goodness is carried through the people. It's not from brick and mortar. The word is always with people and our energy. So, just because the temple's gone doesn't mean they can
Sure. Yeah,
pursue.
as long as you have people, you can,
Yep.
they can pursue love and goodness, regardless of what things may have been destroyed. I don't know about y'all, but that feels very relevant for me.
I just watched, this Nova thing on ancient birth,
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking about 4 billion years ago when we didn't have our atmosphere, there wasn't oxygen, there wasn't any water, and it was just a bunch of volcanoes all over there, like the hellish cliffs. But the volcano, the lava and gases coming from there actually it led to like water in clouds, or like what do you call that? And then eventually all of the lava coming out of the volcanic gases created enough like rain clouds, and then it started raining a ton. And then in that water created aerobic organisms that made oxygen, that then helped carbon dioxide that made our atmosphere and made it possible for life. So it was still an awful place, but like out of this like scary environment, it created life. So I just thought it was another example of like all this suffering, but somehow in there we can find
New life
new life.
reborn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Out of suffering, new life
Right.
reborn. Well, thank you all for wondering along with me about today's story.